Okay, welcome everyone to the program today for inland waterways and ports. The Joint League of Women Voters of Wisconsin and American Society of Civil Engineers of Wisconsin's joint program on Invest in Wisconsin's Infrastructure. This is the fourth of 7 meetings on the American Society of Civil Engineers Wisconsin section's infrastructure report card. We'll hear from the authors, professional engineers who wrote the category chapters, and we'll hear from 6 different representatives with perspectives on why this category is so important. The St. Paul District Division Chief, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and the Port Director from Port Milwaukee. There are 2 organizations that are new to me. The U.S. Geological Survey Upper Midwest Environmental Science Center and the Mississippi River Cities and Towns Initiative. And there are 2 of our own organizations, the League of Women Voters, interleague organizations, partnerships between Wisconsin and states surrounding Wisconsin with interest in the upper Mississippi River. And then on the other side of the state, the Lake Michigan Region Interleague Organization. A lot of good information today. After the presentations, we will have an opportunity to participate in a Q&A with authors, panelists, and audience. We'll be joined then by Dean Hain, Port of Green Bay, and Michael Schwar, the lead author of the Inland Waterways category. And when I looked at the registrant list, we have an impressive audience today. So welcome everyone. This program is being recorded and will be available on the League of Women Voters of Wisconsin's YouTube channel. Particularly, we are doing this so that we can forward this meeting to our elected officials who are unable to attend. I'm Carol Diggleman, your moderator today. I am a retired Milwaukee School of Engineering professor who taught for 32 years, did research projects, advised students, mostly in the civil and architectural engineering and construction management department. I'm also a 50-year member of the League of Women Voters and a 33-year member of the American Society of Civil Engineers. Next slide, please. The question that we have been asked from the beginning of this joint partnership is, why is the League of Women Voters working with the American Society of Civil Engineers of Wisconsin? This is the overview of what we'll be doing today. We will hear from Carl Sutter more about what the report card is about. We'll learn a little bit about the American Society of Civil Engineers Wisconsin and the League of Women Voters of Wisconsin. Carl Sutter then will give the presentation on inland waterways. Kyle Bereither will give the presentation on ports, and then we'll turn to the panel members. And each has an introduction bio and has 5 minutes to tell us about their activities. That is followed by everyone, authors, panel, and audience for Q&A, and then closing. Next slide, please. Why is the League partnering with the American Society of Civil Engineers? The short answer is we were invited. We then started reading the infrastructure report card and realized that this isn't just the engineers' infrastructure, it's all of our infrastructure. And we looked at the grades and decided that yes, we would accept this invitation to work with them on education. As Carl will tell us, the report card evaluates 13 categories: aviation, bridges, dams, drinking water, energy, hazardous waste, inland waterways, ports, roads, solid waste, stormwater, transit, and wastewater. This is infrastructure we all rely on every day. The grades, energy was the first of our meetings. It has the highest grade, a B, which means adequate for now. The rest are either C's, which is mediocre, requires attention, or D's, poor, at risk. The report card is giving us a heads up that we can't take these systems for granted. They are aging. Infrastructure projects are large. They cross local and state jurisdictions and require public financing to complete. They're designed to serve the public and protect the environment. The very things that we take for granted. Because we, the people, ultimately pay for Wisconsin's infrastructure, we will be asked to fix it and address every other issue that we have, including COVID and climate change. So the League felt that it is our civic responsibility to become better informed and our civic duty to contact our elected officials and have informed input to them. We support increased investment in infrastructure. We need to fund ongoing operations and maintenance. We need to fund improvements, and we need to fund innovations. As we learned during the 4 overview meetings with Carl Sutter as engineer and William Holohan, economics professor at UW-Milwaukee, we can raise infrastructure grades and also pass along valuable assets to everyone's children and grandchildren. Next, we will I'll introduce Carl Sutter, and he's wearing several hats today. He'll give us a brief background on American Society of Civil Engineers, and he'll then give the Inland Waterway presentation. Next slide, please. Carl Sutter is Senior Vice President of the Environment and Infrastructure Division at McMahon Associates in Neenah, Wisconsin. He's a professional engineer and certified construction specifier with a Bachelor of Science in Civil and Environmental Engineering from UW-Madison. He has over 40 years of experience in engineering, most of it in the public realm of environmental and infrastructure engineering. As part of his career, he assisted in the creation of the first multi-jurisdictional stormwater utility in Wisconsin. Sutter has served in many ASCE positions at the local and state and national levels. In addition to his work on the 2020 report card, Carl assisted with the creation of the 2003 and 2007 report cards. He's also been a spokesperson for the 2009, 13, and 17 report cards on America's infrastructure. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Carol. The American Society of Civil Engineers, or ASCE, is the oldest professional engineering organization in the United States. It is a not-for-profit society and was founded in 1852 in New York City. It is worldwide with over 150,000 members in 177 countries. It also consists of 9 institutes which specialize in specific areas of civil engineering. These institutes are architectural engineering, coasts, oceans, ports, and rivers, construction, engineering mechanics, environmental and water resources, geotechnical, structural, transportation and development, and utility engineering and surveying. The Wisconsin section of ASCE was established in 1923. It comprises most of the state with the exception of the area near Superior and consists of 4 branches and 1,886 members. ASCE works to raise awareness of the need to maintain and modernize the nation's infrastructure using sustainable and resilient practices, advocates for increasing and optimizing investment in infrastructure, and improve engineering knowledge and competency. Civil engineers are global leaders building a better quality of life. Our society mission is to provide essential value to our members and partners, advance civil engineering, and serve the public good. Our code of ethics lists that engineers, first and foremost, protect the health, safety, and welfare of the public. This presentation is part of our advocacy and education effort. And at this time, I would like to welcome Louise Petering, President of the League of Women Voters of Wisconsin, who will give you a brief introduction to the League of Women Voters. Thank you.
And Carl, I'm going to interrupt. This is Deborah Cronmiller again. I'm the Executive Director. I just got a call from Louise. Her internet has failed. So I will share a little bit about the League with everyone using Louise's script. The League of Women Voters is comprised of 20 local league organizations around the state. We have over 2,800 members currently in our ranks. Over 5,000 members and supporters across Wisconsin contribute to our mission to empower voters through education and advocacy and to defend democracy. Next slide, please. The League of Women Voters of Wisconsin is a nonpartisan organization. We do not support parties or candidates. We are inclusive as we welcome all members to join the League, and you can find out more about us at our website, lwvwi.org. The League for nearly 100 years has been a multi-issue organization, supporting open, responsible, and responsive government, wholesome communities, and healthy environments for all. We are a political organization. We actively advocate for issues based on these positions that have been established after study and diverse sources and member agreement. For 100 years, the League of Women Voters Education and Advocacy to Empower Voters and Defend Democracy has made us a very excellent partner with the ASCE. And with that, I will turn it back to Carol.
Next slide, please. At this time, I'm going to introduce the author of the Inland Waterways chapter. Michael Schwar is a water resources engineer at Stony Point Hydrology LLC in Mukwonago. He has a PhD in civil engineering from UW-Madison and a master's in environmental engineering and sciences from the University of Washington, Seattle. He has over 20 years of consulting experience in addition to 4 years at the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, Rock Island District. In addition to his consulting practice, he occasionally serves as an adjunct teaching professor at Milwaukee School of Engineering. Then we will start Carl's presentation. This is the ASCE icon for inland waterways, and it gives the grade of C-. So I want to remind everyone on right now that as we are listening to Carl's presentation and then Kyle's presentation and the panelists, if you have a question, put that question into the chat. And then when we're finished with all of the panelists, then we'll turn to the question and answer period, and Morgan Grunau will handle, she'll be monitoring the chat and we'll begin to address questions. Okay, our next is Carl.
for attending the presentation of the Inland Waterways category of the 2020 Wisconsin Infrastructure Report Card in conjunction with the League of Women Voters of Wisconsin. Access to reliable, safe infrastructure improves the quality of life and sets the table for underlying systems that must support it, namely our infrastructure. Clean water, surface and drinking water, roads, bridges, transit systems, airports, water and sewer systems, inland waterways, dams, ports, and energy systems are categories of infrastructure that directly affect our ability to live, work, play, and produce economic expansion and development. Infrastructure provides the foundation of our state's economy and is integral to preserving our high quality of life. Much of Wisconsin's infrastructure requires capacity or maintenance upgrades or is reaching the end of its expected lifespan. Systems built decades ago need upgrading to better prepare for security threats, larger storm events, increased use of renewable fuels, new technology, and a changing population. The Wisconsin ASCE Report Card Committee of Engineering Experts assessed the overall Wisconsin grade as a C and the inland waterways grades as a C-. We can do better, and we strive to reach a B grade. Some of our recommendations to increase this grade include increase overall investment across all infrastructure sectors to ensure safe, resilient, and reliable systems to maintain and improve the quality of life and economic health for Wisconsin residents. Leadership at the state and federal levels must have targeted discussions and build consensus to facilitate necessary updates for outdated infrastructure based on the needs of Wisconsinites. Along with increased investments, efficiencies and new technology can help bridge the gap between smart investment and overall infrastructure needs, encourage new methods of design and construction, and defray costs while providing for a better future for Wisconsin. Project priorities should be set for investment at the state's most outdated and overcapacity infrastructure needs. The COVID-19 health crisis entering the latter part of this report card effort and was not included as discussion in the individual categories. However, this pandemic caused great changes to our infrastructure use and funding. Commercial water demand dropped. Most commuters stayed off the roads and away from transit, and airports were virtually empty. A sizable portion of the existing infrastructure systems just mentioned are supported with user-generated revenue streams that significantly declined or vanished because of our new normal. Additional demands continue to be placed on municipal and state budgets, leaving less support for parks, schools, and other publicly owned infrastructure. These shortfalls in funding need to be rectified. The health crisis continues to place unprecedented strain on our economy. At the federal level, Congress should make infrastructure investment a centerpiece of its immediate response and long-term economic recovery strategy. Now is the time to renew, modernize, and invest in our infrastructure to maintain our great state and our country's competitiveness. And please remember that delayed improvement and maintenance results in greater costs in the long run. The report card sections are analyzed based on the following 8 criteria. Capacity. Does the infrastructure's capacity meet current and future needs? Condition. What is the infrastructure's existing and near future physical condition? Funding. What is the current level of funding from all levels for the infrastructure category as compared to the estimated need? Future need. What is the cost to improve the infrastructure? Will future funding prospects address the need? Operation and maintenance. What is the owner's ability to operate and maintain the infrastructure properly? Is the infrastructure in compliance with government regulations? Public safety. To what extent is the public safety jeopardized by the condition of the infrastructure, and what could be the consequences of failure? Resilience. What is the infrastructure system's capability to prevent or protect against significant multi-hazard threats and incidents? How able is it to quickly recover and reconstitute critical services with minimal consequences for public health and safety, the economy, and national security? Innovation. What new and innovative
techniques, materials, technologies, and delivery methods are being implemented to improve the infrastructure. The grading scale is as follows. A, exceptional, fit for the future. The infrastructure in the system or network is generally in excellent condition, typically new or recently rehabilitated, and meets capacity needs for the future. A few elements show signs of general deterioration that require attention. Facilities meet modern standards for functionality and are resilient to withstand most disasters and severe weather events. B, good, adequate for now. The infrastructure in the system or network is in good to excellent condition. Some elements show signs of general deterioration that require attention. A few elements exhibit significant deficiencies. Safe and reliable with minimal capacity issues and minimal risk. C, mediocre, requires attention. The infrastructure in the system or network is in fair to good condition. It shows general signs of deterioration and requires attention. Some elements exhibit significant deficiencies in conditions and functionalities with increasing vulnerability to risk. D, poor, at risk. The infrastructure is in poor to fair condition and mostly below standard, with many elements approaching the end of their service life. A large portion of the system exhibits significant deterioration. Condition and capacity are of significant concern with strong risk of failure. F, failing or critical, unfit for purpose. The infrastructure in the system is in unacceptable condition with widespread advanced signs of deterioration. Many of the components of the system exhibit signs of imminent failure. As previously stated, inland waterways received a grade of C-. Inland waterways consist of the navigation channels and associated structures, including locks, dams, training structures, and navigational aids that support commercial transport of materials between ports, terminals, or other locations. Barge transport can provide the most fuel-efficient way to move goods across the country. A barge can move goods 4 times farther than trucks and 1/3 farther than trains using the same amount of fuel. Nationally, 60% of grain exports and 20% of the coal used to generate electricity are moved on inland waterways. In Wisconsin, 25.8 million tons of cargo were transported along the Mississippi River in 2017, consisting primarily of iron ore, steel scraps, and food products. In Wisconsin, although the Great Lakes represent a prominent shipping corridor, this water-based trade thoroughfare has been considered in the ports category. Instead, the Mississippi River is the only significant commercial inland waterway currently operating in Wisconsin. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers operates and maintains 213 miles of the Mississippi River in Wisconsin as a water highway for freight. This waterway includes 9 locks and dams operated by the St. Paul District of the Corps and Lock and Dam number 11 at Dubuque, operated by the Rock Island District of the Corps. Prior to 2004, the Detroit District of the Corps operated 9 locks along the Fox River entering Green Bay. But that waterway has not been operational since 2015 when the Menasha Lock was closed to prevent the spread of round goby, an invasive fish. The 5 locks at Kaukauna have been closed since 2019 and will remain closed until the bridge at Kaukauna Lock 1 is repaired, though there are no dates of their expected return to normal operation. Capacity. Freight traffic on the Mississippi River waterway in Wisconsin, north of Lock and Dam 11, has declined since usage peaked at over 10,500 barges carrying approximately 18.4 million tons in the late 1990s. However, barge use has recently increased, in part due to increased transport of corn and soybean harvests. In 2016 and 2017, an average of 9,000 barges passed through the locks, representing 15.8 million tons of freight. Assuming the historical numbers represent the system's capabilities, usage is currently about 85% of capacity. However, delays at locks due to heavy traffic, condition improvements, and/or routine maintenance closures increase the delays and costs of shipping goods along the waterways. Between 2011 and 2017, the percentage of vehicles experienced delay has increased from 6% to 35%, and the average delay per lockage increased from 20 to 70 minutes. Some locks saw over 50% of vessels delayed. Condition. This slide shows the condition of locks and dams on the Mississippi River as of 2017. It shows the last date of refurbishment along with the condition based on the percentage of tows delayed. Most of the locks and dams were built in the 1930s with an expected 50-year lifespan. 6 of the 10 locks and dams were refurbished in the early 2000s, while the rest were refurbished in the 1990s. While refurbishment is not equivalent to reconstruction, these efforts extend the useful life of the infrastructure. However, the most recent renovation, Lock and Dam number 8, was completed 18 years ago, which means that many locks require extensive additional improvements or overhaul. Targeted funding allowing component replacement has temporarily kept locks and dams functional, but major rehabilitation is needed to ensure long-term durability and extended facility life. The current state of the Mississippi River locks and dams has increased delays and wait periods for barges. All the locks and dams have continued to increase wait periods and number of tows delayed. The lack of funding prevents dredging practices at the frequency the Army Corps of Engineers recommends. Table 1 shows the condition of the locks and dams based on the number of vessels delayed at the lock. Funding. Inland waterways construction and rehabilitation costs, including locks, are shared by the federal government through general funds and by users through the Inland Waterways Trust Fund, or IWTF, on a 50-50 basis. The IWTF is supported by a 29 cents per gallon tax on barge fuel and is used as the non-federal match for federal appropriations. In April 2015, this user tax was increased by 9 cents for the first time since 1995 upon the urging of the Inland Waterways Users Board, a group of industry representatives that monitors the use of the IWTF to increase potential investment in the system. Federal projects are authorized through the Water Resource Development Acts, and federal funding comes through annual appropriations. Operation and maintenance costs for inland waterways are covered in full by the federal government. The Army Corps of Engineers also received annual funding from the Upper Mississippi Restoration Program. The Army Corps of Engineers uses the Water Infrastructure Finance and Innovation Act through the EPA and the Corps Infrastructure Financing Program. They have also initiated the Civil Works Public-Private Partnerships Pilot Program to investigate the viability of new delivery methods that significantly reduce the cost and duration of project delivery by providing significant upfront funding, leveraging appropriations while optimizing local participation, and promoting risk sharing in project delivery. Additional funds, $1.5 million, pushing total lock funds to 45% of budget, were dedicated to improvements at 3, 4, 5, and 5A. A 2018 federal award allowed for the fabrication of new miter gates that will be installed at locks 5A, 8, and 10. The new gates are planned for installation during the fiscal years of 2021, 2022, and 2023, respectively. Funding for repairs depends on an appropriations process that can result in variable or erratic funding levels from year to year. The lack of consistent, reliable funding affects the operation and maintenance as well as the implementation of major rehabilitation needed to keep the Mississippi River operating at an acceptable level of performance. Future needs. Overall, the Wisconsin Department of Transportation foresees changes in the waterborne transport of several commodities by 2040, as shown on this slide. The impacts of these changes on inland waterway transport is not clear, as a large portion of the transport would occur at Great Lakes ports. However, it is reasonable to infer these trends signal an expected increase in demand for barge traffic in Wisconsin. Several component replacement projects that have already been established are scheduled to occur within the next 5 years. However, according to the Army Corps, operation and maintenance and major rehabilitation budgets do not sufficiently cover all the expenses necessary to ensure the navigation system operates at an acceptable level of performance. While no new locks or dams are planned for this system, increased funding will be required for rehabilitation to extend the life expectancy of the existing structure. Operation and maintenance. Operation and maintenance includes action at the lock and dam structures and channel dredging to maintain the 9-foot channel depth at low water level. The Army Corps of Engineers St. Paul District Work Plan for fiscal year 2019 allotted $31.8 million for O&M and channel improvement along its major portion of the Mississippi River, and $40 million for grade improvements, river dredging, and surveys. Many channels are not dredged as often as the Army Corps of Engineers recommends. Upgrades and improvements were also undertaken at 4 of the 10 locks along the Wisconsin section of the Mississippi River during FY 2019, and gate replacement is scheduled to occur for 3 additional locks during fiscal years 2021, 2022, and 2023. Several interested parties have allocated private funding for O&M works in addition to the funding provided by the Corps. Note that the Corps of Engineers allocated more than $4.2 million in fiscal year 2019 for O&M along the Fox River Waterway system. The Fox River is no longer used commercially, but recreational use continues. The Army Corps of Engineers has turned control of the locks over to the Fox River Navigational System Authority. Public safety. Reduced efficiency, or in the most extreme case, system closure, would result in an increased reliance on trucks to transport goods over long distances. Increased truck traffic increases the need for road repairs and the incidence of accidents on roadways in Wisconsin and elsewhere. Furthermore, due to relative efficiency of inland waterway cargo transportation as compared to trucks, failures along the waterway would reduce the efficiency of transport and increase costs and CO2 emissions. Because inland waterways are run of river structures, risks due to extreme weather and or catastrophic structure failures result in threats to the system's ability to maintain appropriate water level elevations. If water level elevations decrease, the ecosystem functions may be impacted, and communities may experience recognizably lower summer and fall water level. Resilience and innovation. The Army Corps of Engineers budgeting process considers the risk to project performance when prioritizing repair and improvement projects to the nation's waterway system. In March 2016, the Army Corps issued the report entitled Technologies to Extend the Life of Existing Infrastructure to disseminate the best practices regarding life cycle maintenance management, innovative technologies, and emerging capabilities at the Army Corps locks and dams. The ASCE Wisconsin section makes the following recommendations to raise the grade for inland waterways. Considering allowing the Army Corps of Engineers contract authority for projects or some other appropriate mechanism to avoid the stop and start of the construction currently happening because of the appropriations process. Fund waterway projects to the authorized levels and do so consistently, passing a Water Resources Development Act on a 2-year cycle. Ensure full utilization of the Inland Waterways Trust Fund by providing matching federal appropriations and increase the funding of operation and maintenance of the inland waterways each year. Utilize alternative financing and delivery methods, such as public-private partnerships when appropriate. Develop and implement a standardized measurement for delays on this. As you can see, Wisconsin and inland waterways still need attention. However, you are now equipped to speak on the issues regarding inland waterways. For access to the complete Wisconsin 2020 Infrastructure Report Card, please visit infrastructurereportcard.org/Wisconsin as shown on this slide. I would also like to emphasize it is important to view infrastructure holistically in addition to each individual infrastructure category. As an example, greater use of inland waterways to move freight or transit to move people results in decreased traffic for our bridges and roads, increasing their efficiency and useful life. I would also like to give special thanks to Michael Schwar and Dennis Weiland, the ASCE Wisconsin section members who led the research and prepared the Inland Waterways category report for this report card. Thank you for your time and attention. Please feel free to ask questions on this at the conclusion of the panel discussion.
Thank you, Carl, for that presentation. Tremendous amount of material and information in that presentation. We're going right on to the next presentation on ports. And this is the icon on ports. The grade is C+. And next we'll introduce Kyle Bereither, the lead ports author. Next slide, please. Kyle Bereither, PE, and ASCE has more than 14 years of environmental consulting experience. His undergraduate degree in environmental engineering was completed at Michigan Technological University, and he is currently pursuing a master's degree in the same field at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. He has worked his entire career in the greater Milwaukee area. His experience includes investigation, evaluation, and remediation of contaminated sediment, soil, and groundwater. Kyle has been active with the American Society of Civil Engineers Wisconsin section Southeast branch for many years and was a primary author of this ports report card. Next slide, please. Kyle's presentation.
All right, so just want to verify, can everybody hear me?
I can hear you.
All right, well, thanks for that introduction, Carol. And just thanks everybody for attending and taking time out of your busy schedules to talk about infrastructure. And thank you to the Wisconsin section for their support and the League of Women Voters. And then again, a special thanks to Carol for rounding everyone up to do these sessions. I think this is great to get the word out about this. So as mentioned, I'll be discussing the port section of the report card. So this is for the year 2020. As a fun fact, we had not done ports before. We hadn't done the report card in a number of years. I'm sure Carl and Marty, who are on the line as well, will attest to the fact that trying to get this completed was not a small task. So it was a great undertaking. We had a great group, and I'm really thankful that I was able to be a part of it. And then a special thanks to my colleague Craig Harley and Brian Scupian, who also helped draft this chapter with me. And you can go to the next slide. Okay, so I won't cover all this too much. These couple slides in the beginning are global slides that Carl covered quite well. But in general, we completed this report card for the state of Wisconsin covering all infrastructure. There was a few categories we weren't able to cover. Again, it's really difficult to find enough volunteers to cover each category adequately. At the end, there is a link that will be provided, I believe, to the group, or it was in the invite, that can get you the whole report. And so for all the categories that we did score, the overall GPA for the infrastructure of Wisconsin was a C. And for the ports, we got a C+. And so a few of the recommendations that were covered, by Carl previously is, we really just need to look at investing overall, in our infrastructure. And I'm pretty excited, about our state of discussion of infrastructure right now. I mean, it's been in the news several times. We've been trying to push for this for many years. So it's pretty exciting that there's some leadership, which is the second bullet that's going on right now, and that, some priorities are hopefully being shuffled around so that when there is adequate funding, that we can really start to address the areas that need the most, help. You can go to the next slide, please. Again, these are just the global criteria and the grading scale. I won't go through these each one by one, but just to kind of set it up, it was a C+, so it was right between good and mediocre for the ports. And, you know, as a caveat, this was the first year that we did the ports. Our biggest goal was to gather, you know, as much information as we could and really just get a grade to get the word out there for this specific category. And I'm really excited that there's several people on the line that are, you know, working in this specific category. We felt that it was between, you know, it was adequate for now, but there were some things that would require attention. And I'll discuss a few of those as we move forward. And, you know, all of this is based off of, you know, those 9 criteria. You can go to the next slide, please. So ports here in Wisconsin, it's an interesting subject, and I have to admit, I had to do quite a bit of research. You know, I do, you know, dabble in the contaminated sediment world, and I'm familiar with a lot of the infrastructure, but it is not exactly my forte. I was lucky enough to have 2 other volunteers that had a little more in-depth experience. But when you think of ports, at least my mind, I think of, you know, California or somewhere that's really, you know, right by the ocean. But when you look at Wisconsin, we have thousands of miles, you know, adjacent to Lake Michigan and then Lake Superior. And, you know, as Carl mentioned, we have the Mississippi along the western border. And so we really have about 20 harbors, you know, let's say, and there's 8 major ports that are handling freight. I would assume most of you will be familiar with these, but, you know, there's 3 located on Lake Michigan. So Manitowoc, Milwaukee, and Sturgeon Bay. 2 on Green Bay, still part of Lake Michigan, but kind of breaking them down a little bit. And I do have a picture on the next slide. But 2 on Green Bay, so that's Green Bay, and then Marinette, which is also Menominee. There's a few on that northern side of that border. 2 on the Mississippi, the La Crosse and the Prairie du Chien, and then the 1 on Lake Superior, which is our largest one that we share with Minnesota, which is Superior and Duluth. You can go to the next slide, please. And so this was a really interesting snapshot of our ports in Wisconsin. You know, it's pretty amazing. There's about 10,000 jobs and related to this category, and we generate more than about 1.6 billion annually. And I was just looking this up a minute ago to compare to some other, let's call them similar states, you know, in the Midwest. But for us, that was about 1.6. You know, Illinois is only about 500 million, which I thought was surprising. And then you look at Indiana, that's 11.3. And you know, the reason that jumps out is Gary, Indiana, and the harbor with all their steel mills and everything like that. But I guess that's an interesting range. So it shows you that there is possible growth in some other, you know, aspects that we could maybe look into. But this ranks the ports that I just mentioned, the freight ports that do the commercial business from most tonnage to least tonnage. And you can see Superior Duluth is huge. That asterisk up there, the 1 is showing that this information was pretty much summarized from 2014 to 2019, and that tonnage for Duluth Superior, there's about 35,900,000 tons between the 2 ports, so they're right next to each other. And it was assumed that about half of that, you know, was belonged to Superior. And you can see there's a large jump down to Milwaukee, but Milwaukee still does quite a bit, you know, of operations. And you'll see that, you know, major cargo, there's an array of cargo. In Milwaukee, if you look, you can go on, there's several websites where you can actually look at ship traffic and some other commodities, but lots of salt, some steel, coal, iron ore, lots of different products. But, you know, coal and limestone and cement are big for Manitowoc and up in Duluth Superior. And then that picture on the right side gives you a little, you know, snapshot of where these large ports are, you know, across Wisconsin. You can go to the next slide, please. So this picture on the right, I thought gave a good overview of how our infrastructure is really all connected. And that was one thing I really wanted to drive home here today is, you know, these ports are just a spot where we're bringing in or shipping out material to get to another state and then moving it across our state and to another state. And as Carl had mentioned in his presentation, you know, all of our infrastructure is connected in some way. And so we really need to make sure that everything is hopefully humming along nicely. And when we evaluated our ports, we thought that they had sufficient capacity. It didn't seem like there was any struggle in that we knew of. I'm very interested. I know we have a few members of the port on the call that can maybe add on to that. But we did notice there was some ports that are a little limited by adequate rail or highway access. Those were more in the northern part of the state. Milwaukee seems to have adequate access, and so does Superior, but some of the other ones were a little bit limited, you know, getting in and out. And, you know, sometimes that the struggle with that is because, you know, there's a lot of increasing property costs, or some of the businesses are not as active anymore and are still taking up some of that land and things like that. So it appeared to us that there was definitely some room, you know, for some expansion. If you go to the next slide, please. For the condition, we also noticed, again, somewhat of the same trend. And, you know, I would also like to go back to my reference. We did do the best with the information that we were able to gather. And another plug is really, you know, good data in or bad data in is good data out or bad data out. We struggled here and there to get adequate input from all of the ports. Some were very helpful and provided us a lot of great information. Some of it I felt like the information we were able to get our hands on was a little outdated. So we did visit ports that we were able to get to. We did not make it all the way up to Superior and had to rely on either word of mouth or, you know, Google Earth images and things like that. But again, it seemed like it was quite sufficient in condition, but the biggest thing that we noticed was, you know, just degrading infrastructure, which is, I think, a theme, you know, here in Wisconsin, especially in the Midwest, with a lot of difficult weather conditions. And the way to really handle that is, you know, really long-term, you know, maintenance. I know Port Milwaukee, just since we are working with them currently on a long-term maintenance plan, is trying to map all that out. And it's difficult because, you know, there's probably more money is needed than what is, you know, able to be, you know, fixed. And so you have to have a long-term plan, figure out what needs to be done first, and work your way and have that plan so that you can space it out. And I don't know, from the different ports that we spoke with, some had a very well mapped out long-term maintenance plan, and others were lacking. Others didn't seem to have much other than very specific areas and not the port as a holistic, looking at it holistically. You can go to the next slide, please. So one interesting thing is we did seem to determine that there was very adequate funding, you know, for ports if they were looking for it. And again, I hope that if I am a little misled with that we can have that discussion afterwards. But we found several programs that were very helpful that, you know, that could be utilized by the ports. This harbor assistance program, it was documented that there's been over 114 grants worth over $150 million since that was started in the 1980s. The transportation economic assistance, which is a matching grant, and that had over 367 grants worth over 120 million since the start in 1987. But only one port project was funded since 2002, and we couldn't find an exact reason why. And so one thing I would like to discuss a little bit more is why some of those grants might not be, or that assistance might not be utilized, and if there's something else that we need to help with that. We also noticed that there was low interest funding for infrastructure through several sources, such as this FAST line, so fostering advancements in shipping and transportation for the long-term achievement of national efficiencies. I know that's a mouthful. I know that there was a grant for that awarded for, I believe it was for the Badger up north in Manitowoc. And then there's also a few other ones that I won't go into all of them, but it seemed like there was quite a bit of funding. And so I would like to see how we could possibly utilize that a little bit more for areas that are needed. And to reference some of these numbers back to investment in the Midwest, I was looking up, and, you know, in Wisconsin, a few years ago, because not all the information is available readily, but we invested about 102 million, whereas Indiana was about 75, Michigan was 115, Minnesota was 121, Illinois 57, and lastly, Ohio 130 million. So we were, you know, right along in that midpoint range. So it seems like we're about on par with other states, you know, in the mid, and I only did Midwest. But just to help, I usually need to do that to normalize my thoughts a little bit. So you can go to the next slide, please. So one category that's pretty interesting is the public safety that we grade on. And, you know, I see this as safe and efficient delivery of critical cargo, and then proper unloading practices. And one thing I've noticed for Milwaukee is, you know, a nice secure access for crucial workers, but then public use where applicable. I thought it's nice that the Lake Express is kind of set off from the port to the south, so it makes it easily accessible for the public. And we did review this as best we could, but again, it was a little bit of difficulty identifying where safe practices were and weren't being used. But for the most part, we saw that, you know, the ports had quite good maintenance plans and other things implemented to maintain public safety. We can go to the next slide. So another category is resilience. We reviewed this with respect to some, you know, management of climate change, including lake elevation fluctuations, again, unloading practices and bulkhead deterioration management. We've noticed that there's quite a bit of bulkhead deterioration, and again, it looks like there needs to be more investment into long-term maintenance plans. That seems to be the reoccurring thought when we were looking at a lot of the port categories. In management of climate change, you know, I don't know if anyone has noticed recently, but the fluctuations in Lake Michigan have become so extreme, and that can actually be related to that bulkhead deterioration as well. And so when looking at that, I think there's going to need to be an investment into, you know, that infrastructure so that it lasts long, and then for the O&M, which I think is a recurring issue with just infrastructure in general. I think a lot of investment is upfront, and we don't think about what that actual lifespan is for, you know, for that infrastructure that's going in. You can go to the next slide, please. So innovation was a difficult category. We were looking at some different steel dock corrosion protections, some innovative unloading and loading practices. But the one that I'm going to speak a little bit more on, and maybe we can have some additional discussion on maybe some additional innovation techniques for ports afterwards, but management of dredge spoils. I guess I kind of wanted to plug this because I found this pretty fascinating that right now in the Port of Milwaukee, they're working with several entities to develop a DMMF, which is a dredge material management facility. And if you're familiar with the port, there's a picture of it in the top right. And the reason I brought this up is it's very innovative to go out and to use this area. You know, we already have a facility to the south of that that's almost full. And most of the sediment that's going to go into this is going to be from the Milwaukee Estuary AOC. But what that does is, I'm going to go back to my plug on infrastructural being, you know, cyclical, is if we clean up our rivers and we make that area more usable and people want to use it more, we get growth in our city, then we're going to utilize that port more. And this is just one way that the port is working with several entities to just increase its overall usage and exposure. And I'm pretty excited about this. You can go to the next slide, please. So after reviewing all of that, we wanted to discuss the recommendations to raise this grade. I believe overall we're looking to get the entire report card to about a B or so. And so a C+ is not that far off. The ports was, in our review, was doing quite well. But as I've mentioned several times, I think there's a general update that needs to happen to the infrastructure to meet the demands of these extreme water levels, and a maintenance schedule to be set up so that we can, have proper inspections and fix those things as they happen. We need to work to complete dredging activities, especially including, contaminated sediment. I saw that there was a question in the chat already about contaminated sediment that I'm looking forward to that discussion. But sometimes contaminated sediment can cause some issues for, growth of the port, and they may have to have special disposition of that material. So that can be an issue. And so working to complete activities that need to be, taken care of and get that material dredged so that you can have the correct boats and not slow down unloading and loading is definitely something that's important to make sure that the port is working efficiently. Also to increase, access to the ports. I had mentioned that there's some that just don't have great access. I know I have a project right now up in Manitowoc, and access in and out of there is a little bit of a struggle. There's not many great roads. And so that's something that we could look into, improving, so that as soon as we get stuff off of the boat or need to get it on the boat, that we can do that with more efficiency. Next slide, please. So, and then another couple of thoughts that we had was, again, utilizing those federal grant programs that I mentioned. It seems to us that there's a few options that the ports could use to, have their funds matched. Streamlining the permitting process for port infrastructure improvements. I know that I struggle quite a bit with a lot of permitting in my work. And so I think that maybe if there's a way that we can identify certain things that need to happen, maybe those processes could be streamlined a little bit so that we could get those taken care of. And then also preparing our ports, harbors, and inland waterways to accommodate the newest generation of ships. Particularly there's smart features and some very interesting vessels out there that I won't go into too much detail with that, but they're almost just a whole new type of ship. And some might even draft more, or they might just need certain ways to unload or load that might be more efficient in the end. And so something we could look into is any ports that are already using those and have some features that, are accommodating these new boats. Maybe that's something that we can look into investing in our ports so that we are not left behind. Next slide, please. So this is the link that I mentioned earlier. If you'd like to visit, you can go here to go download the entire report card. That gives a nice overview, and then each category is discussed very specific for each assessment that we did. And then if you just want to go to the last slide, again, I just wanted to say, thank you so much for, asking me to participate in this and for making this happen. I'm just very excited to get this word out, especially with all the buzz in our political world right now about this. And hopefully that if something does move forward here in the near future, that we have some priorities and some things ready to go so that we can make the necessary improvements that we need for our state. So thank you.
Thank you, Kyle. And the next slide. Thank you to both of our presenters today for the excellent material and information that you've given us. Carl Sutter for the presentation on inland waterways, Kyle Bereither for the presentation that just finished on ports, and Michael Schwar for writing the chapter, and for both categories, also your teams. There were other people who were involved in writing these chapters. Both the writing of the report cards and the giving of these presentations help all of us understand better the condition of Wisconsin's inland waterways and ports. Thank you. After hearing from our panel, which is where we're going next, We welcome authors and to join us for Q&A. And I've already indicated that Dean Hain from the Green Bay port will also join us for that. So let's transition to our panel. Next slide, please. Our first panelist is Tamara Cameron, Division Chief, St. Paul District Operations, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Let's welcome Tamara, who currently serves as the Operations Division Chief in the St. Paul District for the Army Corps of Engineers. She provides oversight of navigation, asset management, flood risk management, recreation and environmental stewardship, business lines within the St. Paul District area of operations. She's responsible for maintaining the 9-foot navigation channel on the Mississippi River between the Twin Cities and Gutenberg, Iowa, as well as a portion of the Minnesota St. Croix and Black Rivers. She's also responsible for operating and maintaining the upper 13 lock and dam systems on the upper Mississippi River, operating and maintaining 16 recreation areas, managing 12 flood control projects located on the district. She has 30 years of experience as a federal public servant throughout the US and overseas, returning to Minnesota in 2000. She's been with the Army Corps of Engineers St. Paul District since 2002, serving as a Deputy Chief of Operations since 2016 and becoming the Chief in April of 2020. Prior service included work at Navy and Marine Corps military installations, primarily within public works and installation management, and with the Federal Highway Administration, Minnesota Division. Tamara earned her Master of Public Administration from Troy State University in Alabama, and her Bachelor of Civil Engineering from the University of Minnesota. She's a registered professional engineer in Minnesota. Let's welcome Tamara Cameron. And next slide, please.
Well, thank you so much for that introduction. I really appreciate it. And thank you so much for your time and attention to this important topic for the economic welfare of our region. The inland waterway moves nearly 830 million tons of cargo annually, and it is the U.S. Freight Network's water highway. Carol, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you very well.
Oh, great, good, great. You know, nationally, our inland waterways actually have a grade of a D+ versus Wisconsin's grade of C-. So I think this is such an important topic right now. And as Carl noted, the majority of our core locks and dams are well past their 50-year design life. However, it's important to note that age does not always correlate with condition. Regular maintenance, rehabilitation, and technological advances can considerably extend the lifespan of a lock. And I wanted to mention that within the Mississippi Valley, so basically from our, the upper Miss all the way down to New Orleans, we operate and maintain over 4,200 miles of navigable channel, 62 locks, 51 shallow draft ports, and 7 deep draft ports. And as you mentioned, Carol, we have 13 locks and dams in our area. That includes Minnesota and Iowa, so only 9 are within Wisconsin per se, and about 280 miles of navigation channel within our area. You know, the backlog, you know, the slide shows our backlog, but the nationwide, the backlog of authorized projects waiting funding is $6.8 billion. And there is an additional backlog of $2.7 billion annually in unmet maintenance work activities. So in St. Paul District specifically, we have our backlog is basically from, you know, that backlog shown is from the Twin Cities to Lock and Dam 10 in Gutenberg, Iowa. And the tools that we use to develop this list of our maintenance needs, we do periodic inspections, periodic assessments, and we conduct operational conditional assessments that give our basically give our sites grades similar to, in a way, like how ASCE is grading our infrastructure, but we grade them out and then prioritize nationally the funding that we will receive based on those priorities. As shown on the slide, the amount of funding we've been able to put toward our O&M backlog has been roughly 20 million in the past 3 of the 4 years. So at this rate, it's going to be very hard to make a dent in our $3 million maintenance, rehab, and replacement backlog. As Carl noted, we will be replacing some of our lock gates in the next few years, but our dam gates are all original with their original paint. As also shown on the slide, the National Research Council recommends an annual maintenance investment of 2 to 4% of plant replacement value. And in comparison, in 2015, the funding for maintenance of all USACE infrastructure was at 0.23% of plant replacement value. And within our district, that is that percentage of plant replacement value is actually even a little bit smaller. Also, as noted earlier, the utility of our inland waterway infrastructure is highly dependent on the ongoing maintenance of the navigation channel. We currently require roughly $15 million per year to maintain our stretch of the navigation channel on the Mississippi River. And unfortunately, the increase in severity, frequency, and duration of flooding is pushing more sediment in the channel, meaning more frequent dredging of greater amounts of material is necessary to keep the river navigable. The increased flooding is also causing lock closures downriver, primarily between locks 16 and 22 in Illinois and Missouri. So we operate as part of a system. I heard Carl and Kyle both talk about that, and I believe it's really important to collaborate on a multimodal and intermodal level. So we've been reaching out to our partners at the ports, roads, and rails. In fact, there's a meeting between us and one of our ports right now during this session. And we have 2 major initiatives. One is resilient navigation. So addressing the backlog as we discussed today, preparing plans for improvement projects that will be ready to execute if we do receive additional funds. And the other initiative is our river to reuse initiative. So we're looking for better ways to manage the sediment that we remove from the river every year to keep that minimum channel. And these initiatives require the involvement of many stakeholders and our agency partners. And we truly appreciate the support and feedback. And it's great to hear Kyle talk about, dredge material management. It's so important to the system operating. And also, Carl and Kyle both noted economy and sustainability. Sustainability are a major consideration when looking at our inland waterway. It carries 1/6 of the nation's intercity cargo. I believe that we can relieve some of the strain on the other transportation modes and ensure that our ag exports move as efficiently as possible. I know it was mentioned before, but a typical 15 barge tow that you see on the Mississippi River is carrying an amount that would require 225 rail cars or 1,050 large semi-loads to move it. Can you imagine the financial and environmental impact if this volume had to be moved onto roads and rail in the event of a failure of our inland system? With the potential for infrastructure funding via the American Jobs Plan, this is a critical time for investment in our inland waterways infrastructure. Use of the inland waterway fuels our economy. It's essential for global trade and international competitiveness, and it has to be a national priority. If we can address this investment gap in infrastructure, it is a shared responsibility. We can't do it alone. We need the support of our partners, local, regional, and state leaders, and particularly consultants and construction contractors, because if we do receive additional funds, we're going to need help rolling that out and executing these maintenance repair projects in an effective and timely manner. I'm going to stop there. I think I used my 5 minutes, and thank you again so much for the chance to talk about such an important issue.
Thank you very much, Tamara Cameron. Such an important category. Our next panelist is Jeff Hauser. Next slide, please. Jeff is a research ecologist with the U.S. Geological Survey, the Upper Midwest Environmental Sciences Center. Jeff is a I'm sorry. This is in La Crosse, Wisconsin. In that position, he serves as the science director for the long-term resource monitoring element of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Upper Mississippi River Restoration Program. He works with multiple federal and state partners, including the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, the Fish and Wildlife Service, the Environmental Protection Agency, and the Department of Agriculture, and the 5 Upper Mississippi River System states to provide guidance for and coordinate the ongoing management relevant long-term ecological monitoring and research being conducted within the Upper Mississippi River Restoration Program. His research focuses on using long-term data to better understand the structure, function, and ecological resilience of large river ecosystems, and using that understanding to inform the restoration and management of the Upper Mississippi River system. He earned his master's and PhD at the University of Wisconsin Center for Limnology and spent 3 years as a postdoctoral research associate at Oak Ridge National Laboratory near Knoxville. Let's welcome Jeff Hauser. Next slide, please.
Okay, thank you, Carol. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Okay, great. I'm going to start with just a brief background on the U.S. Geological Survey for those of you who may not be very familiar. USGS is the independent, non-regulatory, and non-management science agency for the Department of the Interior, and it provides data, research, and understanding to that department regarding the nation's natural resources. USGS has multiple mission areas which address various aspects of the natural environment. The Upper Midwest Environmental Sciences Center, which is where I work, is aligned primarily with the ecosystems mission area of the USGS. The Upper Midwest Environmental Sciences Center is a multidisciplinary science center. We have substantial research focusing on river structure and function, and ongoing research includes things like aquatic and terrestrial native species that depend on these river systems, the risks and impacts of environmental contaminants on those species, how rivers store, process, and are affected by nutrient input from their watersheds, and developing tools to manage and control aquatic invasive species such as zebra mussels, sea lamprey, and invasive carps. I spend nearly all of my time working as part of the Upper Mississippi River Restoration Program, or the UMRR, and that's what's shown in the slide. You can see in front of you there. The UMRR is a U.S. Army Corps of Engineers program that operates as a large multiple agency partnership. This program has 2 complementary elements, and those are the 2 things you can see on the slide there. One of them is the habitat rehabilitation and enhancement element, which focuses on habitat restoration within the river and its floodplain. These projects alter or restore the physical structure of the river to rehabilitate various physical, chemical, and biological conditions in the river. The photo on the left just shows one example of such a project where a group of islands were restored that had been lost to erosion in order to recreate the various habitat conditions associated with those islands. The part of the program I do almost all of my work in is the long-term resource monitoring element, or LTRM. UMESC, where the USGS Upper Midwest Environmental Sciences Center provides the scientific leadership for this element of the UMRR. And the long-term monitoring is conducted in 6 study reaches, and those are the red areas highlighted on the map of the Mississippi River states there on the slide. These 6 study reaches span an informative gradient, or a variety of informative gradients, including climate, discharge, and modifications for navigation. The data are collected in each of these study reaches through a field station that's staffed by state agency personnel from that state. And we collect data annually for various water quality, aquatic vegetation, and fish indicators. On a decadal scale, we collect systemic land cover data based on aerial photography for the river and its floodplain. The research within this monitoring element generally focuses on assessing the ecological status and trends of the Upper Mississippi River system and understanding the structure and function of that ecosystem and what contributes to its ecological resilience. The long-term data that come out of that effort allow us to detect and understand the long-term changes in the river, And I'll just give you two really quick examples of changes that we've observed over the last couple of decades. In the upper impounded portion of the upper Mississippi River, there's been a sustained increase in water clarity and aquatic vegetation over the last couple of decades. And this vegetation is important because it provides critical food for migrating waterfowl and habitat for many popular game fish. A different kind of change has happened in the lower part of the upper Mississippi River and the Illinois River, where there's been a large increase in the abundance of invasive big-headed carps. And through the long-term monitoring information, we've been able to detect a wide range of changes throughout the ecosystem in response to that invasion, where those fish have become dominant. Ultimately, the goal of all this work done within the monitoring is to inform the restoration and the management of the upper Mississippi River system. But it occurs to me in listening to the presentations today that perhaps there are times and places where what we are learning about the river could inform the design and placement of infrastructure. And if so, I would be happy to work with anybody who is interested in knowing more about the available information. That concludes my remarks. So thank you for your time and attention, and I look forward to hearing questions a bit later.
Thank you very much, Jeff Hauser. It was really nice to hear that there are areas in the upper river that have improved and the water is cleaner. Next, we will hear from Colin Wellenkamp. Next slide, please. Colin is the Executive Director of the Mississippi River Cities and Towns Initiative. And I was really delighted to hear about this organization. Colin has extensive experience in representing the interest of public entities in Washington, D.C. He advocates for the welfare of some of the nation's largest cities and nonprofits. He has spent the last 15 years advancing the causes around sustainability, peril avoidance design, water system improvements, community resilience / adaptation, sustainable economic development, first responder resources, renewable energy, and private sector partnerships for sustainable projects. Colin brings this experience to MRCTI to build a new organization around the cities that reside along the Mississippi River. This relatively new organization provides the only forum in the nation through which local leaders can advance the matters around river management for the entire 10-state length of the waterway. He was born in Missouri. Colin has a BA in Environmental Studies from St. Louis University, a JD from Creighton University School of Law, and a Master of Laws in Sustainable Development from George Washington University Law School. Let's welcome Colin Wellenkamp.
Thank you so much, Carol. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. Good afternoon, everybody. Great to be with you. Really appreciate that introduction. I'm out in the field today. As you can see, situated behind me is the city of St. Charles, Missouri. This is actually Old Town. Just beyond that is the Missouri River. The Mississippi confluence with the Missouri is just up that way a few miles, and that away is up into the interior of the continent, the route that Lewis and Clark took. And where I am actually just beyond a few of these buildings, in 1993, 2016, and 2019, the water from the Missouri River was a lot closer to me than it is today. You couldn't walk down anywhere close to the river. It was basically right next to those buildings, right behind me, as was this entire area was inundated. So it's a definitely a very dynamic river. I'm actually standing right next to the county executive building for St. Charles County and up on the bluff. And so you can imagine this area being inundated 3 times in a row in recent history. And we're just seeing more and more of that these days. Our mayors make up our association. So MRCTI is an association of 101 United States mayors from Bemidji, Minnesota to New Orleans, Louisiana. We're in all 10 states. There are 124 mayor-led municipalities directly along the main stem Mississippi River. 101 of them are part of our association. So we've just got about everybody. We're headquartered here in the St. Louis area. Our offices are actually in downtown St. Louis, right next to the Arch and the Mississippi. And we are led by two co-chairs, the mayor of Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and Bob Gallagher, Bettendorf, Iowa. And they are assisted by a mayor representing each of the 10 states along the Mississippi River. For Wisconsin, it's Mayor Dave Hemmer of Prairie du Chien. Right before him, though, longtime leader in our association was Mayor Tim Cabot of La Crosse. He presented to this group a number of times for us, and he was, before he left the mayor's office earlier this year, just a transformative figure, a great mayor and national leader, and really did a lot to lift the entire Mississippi River category to a national priority. We're looking forward to working with the new mayor of La Crosse, as well as Mayor Smith of Onalaska, Wisconsin, and all our mayors in the upper reaches of the Mississippi River. But really, it is important to note that our mayors treat the Mississippi River as one river, one system. It is critical that we address it that way, manage it that way, and include as much collaboration and coordination as possible, because our mayors realize that actually the majority of their problems and solutions can't be solved within their jurisdictions. They need to come together and create a chorus of voice for our infrastructure challenges along the Mississippi River. I really don't have to go into much of that. That has been detailed significantly through the first hour of this presentation with the report's presentation and the report card. What I do want to talk about a little bit just is what the mayors find as a significant priority and where they are putting their collective energy together along the Mississippi River. We have presented to Congress our 2021 federal priority platform for this year, and it does include a lot of infrastructure. As the report card notes, we've got a bit of a problem, and not just our port and surface transportation infrastructure, but our healthcare, our schools, our broadband, our water delivery systems, pump stations, switch stations. All of these things are actually in need of significant repair and attention. And of course, when you're the mayor of a city, all the infrastructure that makes your city run is critical. The most important piece of infrastructure to our mayors, however, is this river system, the Mississippi River. It is America's original Main Street, and it is the most important river in the world. The Mississippi River Basin produces more food than any other basin on earth. We move more cargo on our river than any other river in the Western Hemisphere of the planet. $500 billion of annual revenue comes directly off that river. It supports over 1.5 million jobs directly. And that is right next to the river, all those jobs. It also provides drinking water to over 20 million people in 50 cities every day, including me, my two little girls, my wife, my whole family drinks that water every single day. So this is of critical importance to us and our mayors. Every time the Mississippi River shuts down in any given location, it costs the nation a loss of $300 million per day in lost economic activity. So you can understand that when we can't get to the grain elevators, when we can't get to the ports, when roads flood, and other infrastructure becomes compromised due to not just flooding, but to droughts as well. Drought and low water, they hinder the flow of commodities and the global commodity supply chain just as much as flooding does, if not more, as we have a real problem. Multiple impacts are compromising our efforts to restore the Mississippi River and sustain its economy. Intense heat episodes, as well as named and unnamed storms. Our mayors have come up with a plan to address all this. And a lot of it has to do with actually not built infrastructure, but natural infrastructure. Wetlands, forests, marshes, riparian areas, reconnected floodplain, and reconnected backwater areas are the future for our mayors in terms of restoring not just the ecology, but the economy of our river and making that global commodity supply chain that we depend so heavily on more reliable. Manufacturing, outdoor recreation and tourism, and agriculture comprise the top 3 slots of economies along our Mississippi River and in our cities, in that order, 1, 2, and 3. It is a freshwater economy. We along the Mississippi River enjoy a $456 billion annual freshwater economy every year. And without that access to fresh, clean water that is ready, equitable, and never without compromise, that economy will falter. I would direct your attention to the Safeguarding the Mississippi River Together Act. This is the SMART Act, written and proposed by our mayors to Congress this past March. It's going to be introduced by Congressman Benny Thompson of Mississippi later this month. We are excited about that and having such a large coalition. There's a lot of great partners on this call that our mayors have worked with closely, including ASCE and USGS, and of course the Corps. One big success recently has been passage of the Resilience Revolving Loan Fund Act, or STORM Act. It was signed into law by the president on January 1st of this year. We hope it gets funded by appropriators for FY 2022. That'll go a long way in incentivizing new resilience projects and making sure that our cities don't have to keep applying for competitive grant funds every year in order to secure funding for new innovative projects that use adaptive management techniques and new innovations to treat the climate impacts we're dealing with. I'll stop right there. Look forward to any questions you may have. And thank you again, Carol, for this opportunity.
Carol, you're on mute.
I am now unmuted. Thank you. Thank you, Colin, for that wonderful presentation. And you opened up so many new avenues for discussion. Our next presenter is Gretchen Sabel, Communications Chair of the League of Women Voters Upper Mississippi River Region Interleague Organization. Gretchen was born in Western Pennsylvania, went to the University of Cincinnati, earning a bachelor's degree in biology in 1975. She worked for the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency in Cincinnati, then moved to Minnesota, working in various water-related programs with the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, the Minnesota State Planning Agency, and the Minnesota Environmental Quality Board. Over the next 36 years, she earned a Master of Public Affairs degree at the Humphrey School at the University of Minnesota and retired from the state in 2014. Gretchen is president of her local league in Anoka, Minnesota, and serves on several committees for the League of Women Voters of Minnesota. She is past president and current communications chair of the Upper Mississippi River Region ILO. Next slide, please. And Gretchen, welcome.
Hello, and thank you. Is the audibility okay with me talking?
Yes, I can hear you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So as League of Women Voters people, I'm going to count on you guys to know what an ILO is. And I'll let you know that in a couple more speakers, Krista Grimm's going to talk more about that. So I won't get much into the organization of our group. I will say that the Upper Mississippi River Region ILO covers 4 states, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Iowa, and Illinois. And we enjoy a wonderful working relationship with LWV Wisconsin. So thank you very much for that. And we certainly welcome more leagues from Wisconsin to join us because more could. So I'm going to talk about something called MRRRI, which is something that it's getting confusing, isn't it, with all these names and all these different Mississippi River whatevers. So this is the Mississippi River Restoration and Resilience Initiative, which is a new bill introduced by Betty McCollum in the U.S. Congress. She introduced it in June. And what it's going to do is establish a program to accelerate cleanups, to accelerate projects, and to really kind of provide more oomph behind Mississippi River cleanups. And as you know, just like Carol said at the beginning here, the League is a political organization. We do back initiatives and we do work on issues. And this is something that the Upper Mississippi ILO is going to be working on, is supporting this bill through education, information, and advocacy. So I just want to tell you a little bit about this bill right now. The bill would establish an MRRRI, everybody's pronouncing it Mary, program office at US EPA. And this program office would have $300 million in annual funding. The funding would be to do projects that, there's a list of 12 things here. So protect or restore naturally recurring hydrologic and ecological functions. That means restoring wetlands, removing, for example, remove and modify structures such as culverts, levees, and dams to restore the natural hydrology. Permanently protect private lands through title acquisition or enrollment into permanent conservation easements. Improve water quality and water retention through voluntary conservation easements. Relocate, elevate, or demolish flood-prone structures and carry out other related floodplain restoration. So, you know, a lot of the other speakers have been talking about the need to upgrade because of flooding. This would provide some money for that. Increase water retention and infiltration through actions to promote a healthy soil ecosystem. That's very important. Reduce non-point sources of pollution and promote landscape scale vegetative cover. So that means that this money can be used to help fuel major change in our agricultural systems. Reduce stormwater flows and inflows that contribute to combined sewer overflows. Clean up legacy contaminants that aren't otherwise covered by other programs. Control, manage, or eradicate invasive aquatic species. And then the last one is pretty interesting and something new. And I'm just going to read it directly here. Address the disproportionate effects of ecological degradation of the Mississippi River on rural and urban economically disadvantaged communities and communities of color. And so this would be something that communities would actually come forward to accept, and that's something new in this kind of a program. Each of the programs that get funding would have to develop actionable goals, do monitoring, and have an action plan, as well as report and do recommendations. The grants can go to public or nonprofit entities, as well as to higher ed institutions and individuals. So that makes it pretty flexible. It would also establish 4 Mississippi River Science Centers in the USGS to lead that, and then develop in the first few years a science plan to guide the whole program. So really, it's a very robust program, and it's something that our UMR knows some things about and will be taking part in promoting. So that's it for me. And I'll let Krista tell everybody about what an ILO is. Thank you.
Thank you, Gretchen, for the information that you presented today. Next slide, please. Our next speaker is Adam Tyndall-Schlicht, the director at Port Milwaukee. Adam was appointed director at Port Milwaukee in May of 2018 by Mayor Tom Barrett. As director, he oversees and directs the port's multimodal commercial and passenger operations, which generates over 100 million in local economic activity annually, and is responsible for administration of Foreign Trade Zone number 2041. In addition to his responsibilities as port director, Mr. Tyndall-Schlicht was appointed a commissioner of the Southeastern Wisconsin Regional Planning Commission in 2020 by Governor Tony Evers. A longtime employee of the Great Lakes St. Lawrence Seaway Development Corporation at the U.S. Department of Transportation in both Washington, D.C. and Cleveland, Ohio, Adam brings significant experience in marine transportation, international marketing, and Great Lakes shipping to his position. He's a native of Oak Creek, Wisconsin. Port Director Tyndall-Schlicht holds a bachelor's degree in political science from UW-Madison and a master's degree in public administration from American University in Washington, D.C. Let's welcome Adam Tyndall-Schlicht. And next slide, please.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Carol, and all for the generous invitation to speak today. I'm just going to cover a little bit about Port Milwaukee in the context of some of the things that we have been discussing, both in the report card and some of what we've been hearing from the other panelists. As we saw, Milwaukee is Wisconsin's second largest, most commercially active port behind Blue Superior. And we've had tremendous success in recent years. In 2019, we grew by 11% when compared to our overall activity in 2018, and growing again despite pandemic conditions from 2020 into 2019 by an additional 5%. A port authority, our port authority, like many in the state that handle commercial cargoes, receive that freight via multimodal transportation. That's the interconnectivity between international vessels that operate through the St. Lawrence Seaway, those vessels that operate exclusively on the Great Lakes, as well as our connection to other modes of transportation, including surface transportation on Wisconsin's highways, our connectivity to the Class 1 rail lines, Canadian Pacific and Union Pacific, as well as pipeline connection for handling of liquid bulk cargoes. When we look at the overall value of the transportation assets that we maintain for the handling of that freight, it is estimated that their value in today's dollars, just at Port Milwaukee alone, is $500 million. So how do we look to the future of not only Port Milwaukee, but of Milwaukee's commercial and recreational harbors throughout the state of Wisconsin in the decades ahead? Like many other ports throughout the Great Lakes region, many of our assets were built in the 1950s and 1960s, and are, as the report card shows, exceeding the end of their useful life. And we're seeing new and unexpected degradation to those assets. The historic high water on the Great Lakes that we've seen over the last several years has created, for us, over $2 million in damage in a storm surge event on January 11th that has required both state and federal intervention to allow us to remediate. And as we consider capital assets and infrastructure renewal, it can't just be through the lens of economic development, but it also needs to be through the lens of coastal resiliency and sustainability, given the real impacts of climate change in both the Great Lakes and the Mississippi River Basin. We've talked, and what you've heard from a lot of today's panelists and subject matter experts is that in order to grow Port Milwaukee and ports and harbors throughout the state, it does require a coordinated strategic approach that involves both local, state, federal, and private capital. How do we do that? I want to highlight again some of the major federal programs that we've been able to leverage. For example, our new $35 million agricultural export terminal, which will soon begin construction, is being partially funded by the U.S. Department of Transportation's new Port Infrastructure Development Program. Port Milwaukee was one of the first ports in the country to be selected for eligibility in that program, and to the best of my knowledge is still Wisconsin's only selectee for that program. Again, we talked about the Harbor Assistance Program, a really unique and important program that exists in the state of Wisconsin and is rarely found elsewhere in other states, which has provided necessary and catalytic funding for Wisconsin's harbors and coastal ports and commercial ports, pardon me, since the early 1980s. Our asset renewal plan is being developed in collaboration with Ramble and is also partially funded by the Wisconsin Coastal Management Program. And that's going to be our strategic and visionary roadmap for future investment in the operation and maintenance of our capital assets for both public accessibility, recreational offerings, including the development of international cruise activity throughout the Great Lakes and at Port Milwaukee, as well as our commercial offering, again, attempting to grow that economic footprint by handling more freight. One final thing that I will add is the role of the Army Corps of Engineers in the federal government cannot be understated. We welcomed the Water Resources Development Act of 2020 as passed by Congress, requiring that the Army Corps of Engineers must utilize the Harbor Maintenance Trust, and of those funds, 13% will be dedicated to Great Lakes projects. Having the Corps more robustly utilize the availability of funds in the Harbor Maintenance Trust will allow both Port Milwaukee and federal infrastructure throughout the state of Wisconsin ideally receive more additional funds and continued federal investment to protect city and state infrastructure. I look forward to your questions. Thank you again.
Thank you, Adam, for that your informative remarks. Our last but not least speaker is Krista Grimm, the Lake Michigan Region Interleague Organization. Krista is an urban planner concerned with clean water and healthy ecosystems, a graduate of Northwestern University. She earned a master's in urban planning and policy from the University of Illinois, Chicago. She's been a member of the League of Women Voters for 24 years, serving in numerous leadership positions, including water issues specialist for the League of Women Voters of Illinois. She's been a member of the board of the Lake Michigan Region ILO for 11 years and leading several public education campaigns on topics such as stormwater runoff. She serves on the Water Committee of the Sierra Club of Chicago and the Nutrient Pollution Reduction in Local Watersheds Committee of the Illinois Sierra Club. She lives in a western suburb of Chicago where you can find her in her native plant garden and is a longtime commissioner on her village's sustainability committee. The next slide, please. And welcome, Krista.
Thank you, Carol, and thanks to the League of Wisconsin for inviting me to participate and for this opportunity to discuss these important issues. The graphic on the left there, Gretchen had asked me to speak about what an ILO is, an intra-league organization. This is a graphic that kind of shows the league's organization. You join the league at the local level, and then you automatically become a member of the leagues higher than that. In other words, at the state and at the federal level. And the League of Women Voters of the Upper Mississippi River region and the Lake Michigan region are regional multi-state intra-league organizations. Whenever there is a topic or an issue that crosses geographic boundaries, like these water issues, leagues may form a intra-league organization that in which those issues can be better addressed. So Lake Michigan Region League, we have been working together for 55 years now. Our membership is comprised of 4 state leagues, Wisconsin, Michigan, Indiana, and Illinois. And of our 46 local league members, 12 are in Wisconsin. And we educate and advocate on Lake Michigan and Great Lakes issues. Specifically, we operate under the federal league's natural resources positions. And then we also have our own Great Lakes ecosystem position, which I'm going to summarize extremely briefly. So 3 pages of specifics down to 5 points. Generally, we support measures that protect the Great Lakes ecosystem, research that informs which measures would protect the Great Lakes ecosystem, coordination of local, state, and federal government efforts to protect the ecosystem, and opportunities for the public to provide input into policy decisions. We oppose activities that can degrade our natural resources, including, in some cases, dredging of harbors, although I'm not aware of any cases where we have advocated against dredging in the last 10 years at least. We are a member of the Healing Our Waters Great Lakes Coalition, and we often we support their efforts and often work with just other organizations on specific issues as they arise. Historically, we have submitted comments supporting increased shipping in the Great Lakes because, as many people have mentioned, it's more sustainable way of transporting freight than other methods. We have supported funding for harbor improvements and for Army Corps of Engineers projects. Just 2 weeks ago, the Healing Our Waters Great Lakes Coalition submitted a letter to committee chairs in Congress, specifically asking Congress to fund port and navigation infrastructure. So these are the kinds of things that are on our radar. Others have mentioned related issues around infrastructure. And I know we're here to talk about infrastructure today, but as Carl said earlier, we have to consider infrastructure holistically. And when you talk about ports in the Great Lakes, the thing that's top of mind is that it has been a significant vector for the introduction of invasive species over the years. There have been increased regulations in the last 20 years. So the introduction of new invasive species has greatly slowed, but there are additional issues that remain, specifically relating to the Lakers, the ships that operate within the Great Lakes. So I do expect that we may be having more discussions about that, and there may be additional regulations possibly to be discussed in the next couple of years. And with that, I will allow us to move forward with the rest of the program.
Krista Grimm, thank you very much for your remarks. Next slide, please. Thank you to all of our panel members. I just want to make one comment. We have a wealth of panel today. When I started working on this early this year, I couldn't reach people, and I kept calling and finally reached people I had on my list, and you were on my list, and everybody accepted. And so I am so grateful for the wealth of expertise and information that you have provided today. Tamara Cameron, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, Jeff Hauser, USGS Upper Midwest Environmental Sciences Center, Colin Wellenkamp, Mississippi River Cities and Towns Initiative, Gretchen Sabel, Upper Mississippi River Region Interleague Organization, Michael Schwar, the author, Ports Category, Adam Tyndall-Schlicht, Director, Port Milwaukee, and Krista Grimm, Lake Michigan Interleague Organization. Next, we have run into our Q&A time. I'd like Deborah Cronmiller to come on and advise us on
Carol,
how much time.
Sure. We are nearing the end of our 2 hours together. Let's go ahead and take 2 or 3 questions if they can be responded to relatively succinctly, and then we'll move to our closing.
Okay, Morgan?
Yeah, the first question is from Lori, who asks, do the Mississippi River states farther down the river invest in their river system any more wisely than Wisconsin?
Would anyone like to take that question?
This is Michael Schwar. I don't have an answer to that question because I don't know exactly how much they invest, but one thing to remember is on the Upper Mississippi River, we require dams and locks to maintain a high enough water level to sustain the shipping. As you go down south of St. Louis, The river doesn't require locks and dams anymore to maintain the deep water level. They do have river structures that keep the channel focused so that the deep waters are provided. But it's kind of comparing apples and oranges. It's a good question. I don't know the answer to that.
Anyone else?
Yeah, this is Colin with MRCTI. So yeah, it's kind of a difficult question to answer because different states have different types of investments that they put into waterways. Because although they're dealing with the same issues, the geography and the dynamics may be different, and some of the solutions may be more diverse. So I would say, for Wisconsin, Waterways and Ports add nearly $4 billion plus to the state's economy annually. That's rather high compared to other states on the Mississippi River all the way down until you get to Louisiana. Louisiana's got the highest because they've got the superstructure port of Southern Louisiana, which is the nation's largest port by tonnage. Given the amount of money that the ports and waterways make for Wisconsin, there's sort of more, there's more of a motivation for an ROI there, if you will, than other other states with less port infrastructure, such as Arkansas. And so their investments would be different because the ROIs are different. So it's a rather complex question, or a simple question, complex answer. States tend to put in what the ROI is directly, is kind of the short of it.
Okay, we're gonna have one last question from Dorothy, who asked, are there ongoing studies to project how the type and volume of cargo moving on Wisconsin's inland waterways and through our ports will evolve over the next 50 years?
I can answer that, Morgan. Again, this is Adam Tyndall-Schlick, Director of the Port, and also answering in my capacity as President of the Wisconsin Commercial Ports Association. The answer is yes. Our work is constantly ebbing and flowing. I can provide a really contemporary example from the recent past, which is really the change in need for coal, for example. As recently as 10 years ago, Port Milwaukee was handling over 1 million tons of coal per year. But as our worldwide industries have become less coal reliant, the need for having that much coal transit through some of Wisconsin's ports, including Milwaukee, have gone away. So my answer is yes, that Wisconsin's ports, if properly funded and continue to adjust to market economies by having readily available, highly efficient, safe, secure infrastructure.
Thank you. I think we will proceed. The next slide.
I can add to that too, Carol.
Okay.
I was just going to add that this is Colin with MRTI. Yeah, so more and more, the global commodity supply chain is containerizing more and more freight, including agricultural commodities. So especially are looking at containerization instead of bulk freight because it's more efficient. And allows for more dynamic intermodal shipping easier. So we're seeing a trend toward containerization and a greater adoption.
I think we lost Colin. So I think we will close. We will move to the next slide. which shows the last 3 of our category series. The next one is July 29th, stormwater and dams. Then August 5th, drinking water and wastewater, and hazard waste and solid waste. You can go to the League of Women Voters of Wisconsin's website. There's an infrastructure button that you can follow and register for the upcoming series. It's been my pleasure to work with everyone on this meeting. And I thank all of you for agreeing to speak today. It has shown me the wealth of information that is out there. And I invite any of your organizations to invite us all to a meeting to follow up on what we learned today. And Louise Petering, the past president of the League of Women Voters of Wisconsin, will close out the meeting. And thank you all for coming. Thanks to panelists, authors, audience, and everyone who is here today. Louise?
Thank you, Carol. League thanks especially to Carl Sutter, who has arranged for the category authors and for his comments today on the inland waterways. And also thanks very much to the ASCE Infrastructure Chapter authors for all their work on the 2020 report card, and especially to Ken Micah and Jennifer Schaaf, who served as volunteer co-chairs of the 2020 report card. Martin Hansen and Jake Gronoller also participated in the steering committee as we planned this series. Also, Carol Diggleman, as a member of ASCE and the League of Women Voters, has been a critical link in organizing these category meetings. Thank you very much, Carol. Finally, congratulations to the American Society of Civil Engineers Wisconsin section on your recent award as ASCE 2021 Advocate of the Year. The League values this partnership and our joint work in the public interest. Next slide. Thanks also to the planning team that the League of Women Voters put together, staff and volunteer League members from around Wisconsin for their contributions to this educational program about Wisconsin's inland waterways and ports infrastructure. Your early behind the scenes planning is very much appreciated. Next slide. The League of Women Voters of Wisconsin now urges the call to action, a call made much more compelling by recent proposals for significant federal infrastructure spending. As debate on infrastructure spending continues in Washington, D.C. and around the nation, we urge you to read ASCE's Failure to Act. In this compelling report, ASCE forecasts that our current pattern of underfunding infrastructure will cost every U.S. household $3,300 on average every year for the next 20 years. We have spent unwisely, and our spending now is not enough. The longer we wait for maintenance and improvements, the more expensive it becomes until maintenance is not an option. Delayed spending is not smart. We can save long-term if we significantly increase spending on infrastructure now. Decision makers who hold the purse strings need to hear from us, and we need to get active. Sign up now for infrastructure category meetings and view past ones at the Study on Wisconsin's Infrastructure button found on the bottom left of our homepage, lwvi.org. Identify your local infrastructure priorities and begin a conversation with your local officials and neighbors. Jot down your concerns and priorities. Contact your local, county, state, and federal officials and tell them of your concerns. And we hope to hear more about those bills that have been introduced and mentioned in today's program to help us with our actions. So track local actions and legislation, and do get in touch with the League of Women Voters of Wisconsin. The League of Women Voters urges you to sign up for Wisconsin Legislative Notification Service, and that is available online. Next slide. Thank you very much for spending part of your afternoon with the League of Women Voters of Wisconsin and the ASCE members about this issue of inland waterways and ports, one very important to our state. Have a very good evening, and thank you.